morning. Siim very officially introduced me, but actually we go way back. So in Estonia, everyone knows everyone, as we've all figured out. And I just wanted to say, I see it's a bunch of cool kids in this audience because everyone wants to sit at the back and the front tables are open. It's okay, I know you're cool. Yesterday I was with the ministers in Sweden and they were not so cool. And we talked about the regulation just briefly in the introduction, and I could talk about regulation for ages. And we're going to discuss a few things in the keynote and later on today about why regulation works or doesn't work. But I'm a firm believer of a new notion that we just coined some time ago, and it's called regulate once only. You know, now we're going to talk about KYC, we're going to talk about AML, we're going to talk about how government handles your data. And Estonia has been pushing for this idea of once-only principle, meaning you should only ask for data once from the government, and then the government should figure out how to exchange data within the public institutions, and hopefully in the future cross-border as well. And now we propose something called regulate once only, because we all know how difficult it is to navigate in this maze of regulations for companies, for individuals, and even for public officials. So my idea now is to get to be able to navigate in the maze of regulations is to regulate once only. But as was introduced, my name is Sandra. I'm the Deputy Secretary General in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications of Estonia. It's a very long title. Normally I get very tired after I even finish with the title, but I have about 14 minutes ahead, so here we go. And what I'm going to tell you about today is how, on behalf of the government, we can actually make services more easier, more user-friendly for companies, including for banks, for the financial sector as well. You know, government shouldn't be only seen as these bureaucratic creatures that live somewhere and do things in silos. Before joining the government, I actually came from the private sector. I worked at Facebook, I worked at Bolt. And for me, I don't even think it could be possible to work in such a position if I didn't know how companies work. So Estonia is one of the Baltic countries. We would like to be known as the Baltic and Nordic countries. What we don't like to be called is the Eastern Bloc country, which sometimes still happen, believe it or not. And when I was just in Germany 2 weeks ago, then a high-level German government official felt that he had to tell me, but we support that Estonia is in Europe. We think you should be in Europe. And I was like, wow, are we still discussing this? So many things I'm going to mention to you today actually refer to geopolitics as well. And because the things that we do, the security behind these processes, normally bureaucratic processes that we're trying to make more efficient, the importance also arises these days from geopolitics. So I represent the Baltics. I'm happy to represent the Baltics. And while we have a lot to learn from trade finance, from the things that you guys know about, I believe that the Baltics, and hopefully especially Estonia, we can tell you a lot about technologies and how to make services more efficient with the use of technologies. So I'm a firm believer that digitalization is not an end goal in itself. Estonia is sometimes referred to as the most digitalized country in the world. But I don't see the point behind this. We should be known as the most efficient country in the world because the digitalization or artificial intelligence or any other buzz word you want to mention, whether it's blockchain, whether it's quantum computing, they are not goals in themselves. The goal is to be efficient, to be secure, to do processes more efficiently in a way that a normal person couldn't do, right? So this should be the end goal, not digitalization in itself. So how we operate in Estonia, in the team which I lead in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, is we want to make the processes more efficient for the companies. Maria promised that we can talk about this later, but I just have to mention, in Estonia we say that now 100% of the government services are available digitally, because as of end of last year, you can also get married digitally. Well, in fact, you can file in the application to get married digitally, but you still have to show your face when you're about to get married. Not for AML purposes, but human trafficking purposes. So we believe that strong competitiveness arises from being this efficient. So the government services to individual 100% now available online, but there's always a parallel track. You can use those services in the physical world as well, but no one hardly ever does. But for companies, I don't know if you know, but we have this DESI index in Europe. It's called the Digital Economy and Society Index. And in terms of using digitalization in businesses, Estonia ranks 15th amongst the 27 European Union countries. This is not very high. But maybe we should ask even, is the goal to use this digitalization in businesses, or is the goal to actually be efficient? So what we're working on in my team is this efficiency. We have a real-time economy team, and the real-time economy team works on making processes happen in the background in real time or in near real time as needed. And it actually comes down to very easy things, such as data standardization. So we would be able to share this data in the background, all of the auditing, all of the documentation, everything you have to do with the government. So you wouldn't have to waste time on paper-based documentation, so you wouldn't have to figure out how to exchange this data as a business between different government institutions. Because if we have standardized data, then actually it's going to make life so much easier for all of us. So this is what we call the real-time economy. And of course, we also need interoperability in order to have real-time economy, in order to have these services which connect with one another. Again, in Estonia, we use something called the X road, which we call the busiest road in Estonia because we don't really have highways. And we exchange a lot of data over this X road. But I mean, the thing is, for all of us here, we don't probably do business only in one country. We should also have the ability to exchange this data, the standardized data, to be interoperable across borders. And when it comes to businesses, you know, every day you create new data, whether it's your invoices, whether it's any process that you do, it generates a lot of this data. And the problem with this data is it doesn't always have a value, because if the data is not valued, it doesn't have value, meaning you cannot base your business decisions on this data if you don't know how to interpret this, if you don't know how to use this data across your supply chains. If data exists and it doesn't have value, it's not really valuable for you. And we, in our team, in the Estonian government, with the KYC procedure that I'm soon going to explain, the purpose is precisely to bring more value to this data, so we become more efficient, as small as we are, and not just use digitalization for the purpose of using digitalization. So precisely a concrete example, a concrete process that probably many of you or all of you have gone through is the KYC process. Why do we talk about know your customer process? Those of you who have experienced it, even if you're a digitalized SME, even if you're a digitalized company or a digitalized bank, many of the processes that governments offer you are still paper-based, meaning you have to scan documents, you have to figure out where you get this documentation from, especially if you want to attract investors, if you want to operate cross-border, if you want to extend or expand cross-border. All of these processes require documentation, and this documentation is on paper, and it takes a lot of time. Whereas actually your government, very much so, especially Estonian government, actually has this data about you that you should provide to your third party. Whether it's your sustainability report, which we're soon going to get to, whether it's just your background information, your financial situation, the government knows about this. But they don't know how to share this data, or they don't want to share this data outside of their own internal databases and information systems. So with the KYC, or with how Estonia sees it, it's actually quite simple to gather this data that the government has about you and share it with third parties based on consent, whether it's a financial institution, whether it's a potential investor. And the government data already has sort of like a stamp of trust on it, because it's not the data that you gathered yourself. It's the data actually that the government, a trusted, at least in Estonia, a trusted institution or a trusted body can share about you. And as I mentioned earlier, to share this KYC data about you, it's especially important in today's geopolitical situation, because what KYC does. It helps eliminate money laundering, it helps fight corruption, it helps fight against financing, let's say, third countries where we don't want to get the money from or where we don't want to share the money to. And today's reality is not there yet. So very soon, you will see behind me on the screen one of the options how we can prototype KYC. It's a new process in a way that what happened was this idea, this startup, was in the Estonian Accelerate program. And it's one of the very rare cases, actually, where a startup or a startup service is given to the government to develop. You can see this information here. Unfortunately, it's in Estonian. I hope many of you understand or realize, but it doesn't even matter. The point is, on the landing page for all of the citizens of Estonia, for all of the companies Estonia, called eesti.ee, you can use different services. So you can track data. You can see if some government institutions have access to your data normally. You can also see all the documentation information about you. You can also give consent to share your data. So what this KYC prototype in the eesti.ee environment will do is basically it will collect the data from different government databases on a consent basis. You, as a private individual, what we're working on right now, or future as a legal person, can go to this eesti.ee website. You can use the KYC tool to gather all of the data that it's relevant to share with your investors, with your financial institutions, with your potential clients. And you can choose to share this data from this eesti.ee directly with the end user who needs this data. So at one point, or to begin with, it's the person who has to go there and then has to share this data. But in the future, what can be is that you as a potential financial institution, as a potential investor, can go to this site and gather the KYC data about your customer from there if they have given the consent to you to actually share this data with them. So as mentioned, the prototype started off as a startup company, but now we've taken this over as a government because we see we have this really valuable data that actually can be shared with those who want to. I mentioned that Estonia ranks 15th in the use of digitalization by businesses in the Europe's DESI index. But globally in the business environment, we're 7th. In Europe, we're 4th. And in my team, we actually strive to build much better services for the businesses so they can figure out how to focus on the actual business activities as opposed to how to figure out how we can be compatible with anti-money laundering legislation, the terrorist financing legislation, what types of documents do we have to share. You know, today only 1/10 of companies figure out how to properly interpret the legislation and pass the documentation as is written in the Estonian money laundering legislation. It's not okay. So I believe that the role of the governments is to make life easier for the companies. And the KYC prototype, which my colleague Rainer will talk about in more details tomorrow in the first panel, you'll see how actually governments can make life also easier, not more difficult for both people and for companies. So thank you for your attention. This is for now all from my behalf. I'm going to be joining the panel so you can ask further questions. Enjoy your 2 days here in Estonia, and as Siim said, sorry about the weather.